Welcome to this Wednesday edition of Market Mantra, the program in which we give you a complete update on the economic, business and stock market news of the day. I am Nishit Kumar and with me is my co-anchor in Hindi, Vishal Sharma.
नमस्कार, मार्केट मंत्र में आप सभी का स्वागत। प्रतिदिन की तरह आज भी हम देश और दुनिया से आर्थिक, व्यापारिक और शेयर बाजार के ताजा समाचार आप तक लाएंगे और उन पर चर्चा भी करेंगे। चर्चा के लिए आज स्टूडियो में आमंत्रित हैं आर्थिक विशेषज्ञ जयंत दास। जयंत, कार्यक्रम में आपका स्वागत।
शुक्रिया।
और सबसे पहले हेडलाइंस के साथ हैं निशित कुमार।
The headlines: domestic stock indices witness modest losses amid the mixed global cues. Sensex closes below 52,550. Nifty settles below 15,700 levels. Rupee weakens to 78 rupees and 7 paise against the US dollar. And Brent crude prices hover around $120 per barrel.
मिले जुले वैश्विक संकेतों के बीच घरेलू शेयर बाजारों में मामूली नुकसान दर्ज। सेंसेक्स 52,550 और निफ्टी 15,700 के स्तर से नीचे हुए बंद। डॉलर के मुकाबले रुपया कमजोर होकर 78 रुपए 7 पैसे के स्तर पर बंद हुआ और ब्रेंट कच्चे तेल की कीमतें $120 प्रति बैरल के आसपास रहीं। कार्यक्रम में सबसे पहले बात करेंगे शेयर बाजार की। मिले जुले वैश्विक संकेतों के बीच घरेलू शेयर बाजार आज हल्के नुकसान में रहे। सेंसेक्स 52,550 जबकि निफ्टी 15,700 के स्तर से नीचे बंद हुए। बॉम्बे स्टॉक एक्सचेंज का सेंसेक्स 0.29% के नुकसान से 152 अंक टूटकर 52,541 पर बंद हुआ। नेशनल स्टॉक एक्सचेंज का निफ्टी 0.25% के नुकसान में रहा और 40 अंक गिरकर 15,692 पर आ गया। व्यापक बाजार में बीएसई मिड कैप इंडेक्स में 0.52% की तेजी रही और स्मॉल कैप इंडेक्स 0.49% के बढ़त के साथ बंद हुआ।
Domestic share markets today suffered modest losses amid mixed global cues. The Sensex closed below 52,550 points, while the Nifty settled below 15,700 level. The Sensex stumbled 152 points or 0.29% to finish at 52,541, while the Nifty fell 40 points or 0.25% to end at 15,692. In the broader market at the Bombay Stock Exchange, the mid-cap surged 0.52% and the small-cap index ended 0.49% up. In the Sensex pack, 17 companies logged gains while 13 declined. Bajaj Finserv was the top gainer as it rose 4.2%, followed by Bajaj Finance, which gained 2%. Tata Steel surged 1.5% and Larsen & Toubro ended 1% up. On the other hand, NTPC lost the most as it slipped 2%. Infosys declined 1.3%. Reliance plunged 1.2% and Wipro fell 1.1%. In the sectoral indices at the Bombay Stock Exchange, 9 sectors rose while 10 logged losses. Auto sector gained the most as it added 0.9%, followed by industrial, capital goods and consumer discretionary goods and services, which added 0.6% each. Healthcare sector ended 0.4% up. On the other side, power sectors lost the most as it fell 0.9%. Oil and energy, utilities indices plunged 0.8% each. The overall breadth of the Bombay Stock Exchange trade was positive as shares of 1,746 companies gained while 1,561 fell. Shares of 135 companies remained unchanged. Well, Jayanta, as we see the trend over the past few sessions, no sort of any clear-cut pattern is coming out. And where do you see this going?
Well, I guess last 4 days it has been a downturn continuously, and obviously today there was a mixed response, but nevertheless the market shortly ended around 150 plus points lower. Obviously the weakness, I believe, is going to remain for a while because I don't expect immediate positive cues in the market, more so because the Fed is also expected to announce a further rate hike, hopefully. And what we have to foresee from here is in terms of inconsistencies of macroeconomic parameters, specifically the global parameters. If I take in the price of oil, which is still around $120 levels, and there is no sign of ebbing. The Russia-Ukraine war, I think, although we have forgotten the fact that there is a war going on and it's almost been discounted, or call it sadly gone into our systems as it happening there. But it is actually, and as we discussed last week also here in the same program, it's now becoming not only a war which obviously we all expected limited to Russia and Ukraine and the neighboring states. It's affecting globally each and every single country. The prices of both supply side factors and products have increased dramatically. The cost of production, the cost of transportation have multiplied. And with this war continuing, obviously you have a situation where, when the war broke out, people were expecting a dramatic change over the next 2 to 3 weeks where, Russia would be invading and taking over Ukraine, and maybe things would settle down fast thereon. But it has not happened. And now the expectation is the status quo is going to remain so for at least unless something drastic happens, which I don't see happening. So taking a cue from here and taking a cue also from how extremely overheated the US markets are, there is a lot of discussion going on in terms of whether we shall see a bigger free fall now from here on, because typically there is a breakaway point from which the market believes enough and it can't be sustained even at these levels, and then the free fall happens. So those sorts of situations are coming in terms of grey clouds in the horizon. They are not an immediate threat in terms of a free fall, but the weakness of the market is here to stay, and more so because the huge withdrawal of foreign portfolio investors from the market on a daily basis, and obviously they would like to park their funds given the new opportunities which are being available because of higher interest rates and all in other places. So these are also factors which would be hinging on the market. What's important to see is specifically for today's market, I guess to some extent the bank as well as the automobile sector has been a bit of a saving grace, although they both faced a huge loss in terms of last week once the interest rate hike happened. But I do believe that at this point of time, it's an extreme cautious market in where it's going to head from here. Obviously, the upper headroom of terms of growth from here on, I don't think is an immediate possibility. There would be some extremely small, maybe intraday or even intra-week cycles of upstarting the market from these levels. We can see 1,000, 1,200 points shoot up all of a sudden, maybe tomorrow or day after, whatever, given some small positive cues happening. But certainly not a sustainable market level, I believe, at this point of time.
Well, we are also joined in online by our market analyst, Avinash Gorakshakar. Avinashi, welcome to the show.
Yeah, good evening, everybody.
Good evening. So today we saw the market once again traveling in the red territory, but at the same time we see the mid cap and the small cap rather on the contrary surging respectively 0.52% and 0.49%. How do you see this dichotomy?
No, I think markets are witnessing a heavy outflow from the FIs, and I think most of the selling is getting reflected in the large caps, where the FIs have got a very large percentage holding. So I think on the broader index there has been a kind of significant fall, but there have been many medium-sized mid-cap companies which have shown reasonably good numbers in quarter 4. And I think that is what the market is now very keen. They are looking at companies where FIs have not invested heavily. So at least in the short term, it's unlikely that these stock prices could get hammered very badly. Our sense is that small caps selectively could definitely give a better kind of return as compared to the large caps. But yes, definitely in the very near term, it all depends on how the macros also pan out. With crude prices going up, inflation going up, there is definitely going to be a challenge for all companies, including mid caps and the large caps. So I think what we saw today was a slightly positive bias on the mid cap stocks, which I think will selectively continue. But large caps, I think, are going to see the main brunt of selling pressure. In fact, today also FIs have sold stocks worth about 3,500 crores. So large caps will continue to remain under pressure.
जी अविनाश जी, यहाँ आपसे जानना चाहेंगे कि आने वाले वक्त में ऐसे कौन से सेक्टर्स आपको लगते हैं जो कि इन्वेस्टमेंट की नजरिए से अट्रैक्टिव हैं, और छोटे निवेशकों के लिए आपकी क्या अभी सलाह रहेगी?
देखिए, मुझे लग रहा है कि इस माहौल में आपको ऐसे सेक्टर्स पे बेट करना है जहां पे दो चीजें हो रही है। एक तो सेक्टर में टेलविंड बहुत अच्छा है। पहला सेक्टर जो हमको पसंद है वो डिफेंस सेक्टर है। हमको लग रहा है, देखिए, गवर्नमेंट भी आत्मनिर्भर भारत के ऊपर फोकस कर रही है। काफी डिफेंस कंपनियां जैसे कि भारत डायनेमिक है, भारत इलेक्ट्रॉनिक्स है, यहाँ पे एक अच्छी खासी ऑर्डर बुक है अगले 2-3 सालों के लिए। तो डिफेंस एक ऐसा सेक्टर होगा जो अच्छा पैसा निवेशकों को ऐसे बाजार में भी कमा के देगा। और दूसरा सेक्टर रहेगा आईटी और बेसिकली फार्मा और ऑटो कंपोनेंट्स, क्योंकि यहाँ पे एक्सपोर्ट का पोटेंशियल काफी ज्यादा है। रुपया वीक हो चुका है तो डेफिनेटली इनको रियलाइजेशन अच्छी मिलेगी, क्योंकि डॉलर वीक स्ट्रेंथन होता है, रुपया वीक होता है, तो इनके लिए अच्छी बात है। और उसके बाद जो एग्रीकल्चर सेक्टर है, एग्री सेक्टर में एग्रो केमिकल्स, फर्टिलाइजर, ये एक सेक्टर है जो हमको लग रहा है पोस्ट मानसून अच्छी पिकअप देखने को मिलेगी। और रशिया यूक्रेन में जो भी वॉर हो चुकी है, वहां पे एग्रीकल्चर इनपुट्स का बहुत डिमांड आने वाली है, क्योंकि खाद का बहुत एक बड़ा क्राइसिस आने वाला है। तो ये 3-4 सेक्टर है जहां पे निवेश के अच्छे मौके हैं, प्रोवाइडेड इन्वेस्टर्स के पास कम से कम 12-15 महीने का टाइम फ्रेम है, क्योंकि ये बाजार ट्रेडिंग मार्केट नहीं है। यहाँ पे आपको थोड़ा निवेश करके थोड़ा सा पैसा टाइम फ्रेम लंबा रख के ही काम करना है।
Avinash, we see rather there have been reports that many top-notch stocks, as in the so-called blue chip stocks, are there almost trading at in the range of 30 to 50% discount at the moment. Do you advise our listeners to get in those stocks at the moment? Avinash ji, can you hear us?
Typically when you say blue chip companies,
yeah,
I believe companies, which have got low debt on the books, where the tailwinds are positive. I think classic examples are companies like Titan, or for that reason, Bajaj Finance, or for that reason, companies like Larsen and Toubro. I think these are very good opportunities for somebody who wants to build a portfolio for the next 2 years. So I think, in the short term, these companies will provide a lot of capital protection, and at the same time, in the longer run, they will provide a good upside, because long-term prospects for these companies is very solid. The management of these companies are very competent. And I think it remains to be always seen that, in bad markets, you need to bet on these blue chips, so that your portfolio is protected and growth is also taken care of.
Well, Avinash ji, the domestic and as well as the U.S. inflation, particularly talking of the U.S. inflation rate, it's almost at a record high at this moment, and obviously, as reports are coming in, the Fed is also constrained rather to hike rates in probably the near future, and taking a cue out of the Fed, the RBI, of course, also would be in line, in sync with the Fed to hike up the rates. So how do you see this coming in future and the effect of it?
I think you're right. I mean, today, around 11:30 India time, we will come to know what is the Fed rate hike. I mean, the broad consensus expectation is 75 basis increase. So I think, yes, the U.S. inflation is a very major kind of a challenge, and, to curtail it, you will obviously see a series of rate hikes, implemented by the Fed. As far as India is concerned, I think they've already taken a 50 basis point hike this time in the repo rate. And my sense is that, we would also see at least another 50 to 75 basis point hike, in interest rates in the year 2022, considering that inflation is yet not under control. And I think it's going to obviously impact demand. Inflation obviously has a near-term impact on the demand for various sectors. So that's going to be a challenge for the corporates. In fact, the first and the second quarter for the entire corporate sector could be a little challenging, and we could see a little bit of decline in the profitability. So I think we have to look at the fact that these are things which are not in our control, and till that time, we'll have to live with this. But yes, I think the fittest of the fittest companies would survive, and obviously the weaker ones which have got large leverage balance sheets are definitely going to be in a big trouble spot, because obviously interest cost now on the profit and loss and the balance sheet is going to increase significantly, because of this higher interest rate cycle which we are going to see after a long time.
जी, अविनाश जी, यहाँ से जानना चाहेंगे कि मौजूदा परिस्थितियों में क्या आप बाजार में अभी और गिरावट की उम्मीद करते हैं?
देखिए, बाजार में जो लेवल है बाजार का 15,700 के नीचे आज निफ्टी बंद हो चुका है। मुझे लग रहा है कि देखिए 15,600 एक बहुत ही इंपॉर्टेंट लेवल है। मैं मार्केट में अभी लोगों को यही कहूंगा कि थोड़ा सा इंतजार करें, जल्दबाजी न करें, क्योंकि 15,600 का लेवल अगर टूटता है कोई भी कारण से, तो मार्केट में बहुत बड़ी बिकवाली आ सकती है, और इसमें 15,200, 15,300 भी दिख सकता है। तो जल्दबाजी करने की कोई बात नहीं, आपको खरीदने के मौके जरूर मिलेंगे, और मेरे ख्याल से कम 1 या 2 महीना आप अपने पैसे लेके थोड़ा सा इंतजार करें। वापस मौका आएगा तो SIP के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से आप खरीदी कर सकते हैं। तो लमसम में बिल्कुल पैसा मत डालिए, क्योंकि मार्केट इस तरफ पड़ेगा आगे ऊपर नीचे, ये अभी कहना मुश्किल है।
जी अविनाश जी, समय निकालने और हमसे बात करने के लिए धन्यवाद। और हम बात कर रहे थे शेयर बाजार के बारे में। जयंता, आपने जिक्र किया था FIIs जिस तरीके से लगातार बाजार से, भारतीय शेयर बाजारों से, घरेलू शेयर बाजारों से पैसा निकाल रहे हैं, ऐसी कौन सी परिस्थितियां होंगी जब FIIs दोबारा से घरेलू शेयर बाजार की ओर रुख करेंगे?
देखिए, ये उनका कैलेंडर ईयर के हिसाब से उन लोग का निवेश का अवधि होता है और ये एक साइक्लिकल सिचुएशन चलते रहता है, क्योंकि FI का मनी, जो पैसा जो भी आता है, सिर्फ इंडिया में नहीं, चाहे चीन में हो, कहीं पे भी हो, वो पैसा इस उम्मीद में आता है कि उन लोग का एक इन्वेस्टमेंट होराइजन पीरियड होता है, 2 महीना, 3 महीना, 6 महीना, साल भर, 2 साल, जैसे भी हो। दूसरा ये है कि अभी मौजूदा स्थिति में खास करके जहां पे अनिश्चितता इतना ज्यादा है और महंगाई चारों तरफ इस तरह से फैला हुआ है, तो वो कोशिश करेंगे कि जिस देशों में थोड़ा बहुत सेंट्रल बैंक का जो अच्छे से काबू पा रहा है इन्फ्लेशन, मुद्रास्फीति को, तो वहां पे जाके वो कोशिश करेंगे न्यू मार्केट ढूंढना जहां पे वो लोग उम्मीद करते हैं कि हेडरूम ग्रोथ ज्यादा अच्छा रहेंगे। अगर ये नवंबर दिसंबर का समय होता तो मैं तो कह देता कि शायद इस साल और पैसा वापस ना आए, अगले साल ही देखना पड़ेगा कैलेंडर ईयर में, लेकिन ये मिड टर्म है सिचुएशन उन लोग का अवधि के हिसाब से। तो ये जरूर है कि अगर मानसून हमारा देश में ठीक रहे जी, और आंकड़े ये बता रहे हैं कि अभी तक मानसून समय पे आया हुआ है केरला में, सामान्य रहेंगे। और स्थिति अगर मानसून का हम सबको पता है कि टिपिकली पिछले साल भी जैसे हमने देखे थे 3 हफ्ते तक ये रुक गया था, तो उस तरह का स्थिति अगर ना बने रहे तो अराउंड अगस्त सितंबर में अगर ऐसा स्थिति बनता है जहां पे एक यूक्रेन रशिया वॉर का एक निश्चित रूप से अगर हमें देखें सिचुएशन के इधर वो खत्म हो गया या कहीं खत्म होने वाले हैं। दूसरा, ये जो रनअवे इन्फ्लेशन है, हालांकि ये रातों रात 1-2 महीने में काबू नहीं हो पाता है, लेकिन अगर कोई इस तरह का सिग्नल आता है जहां पे ये दिखाया जा रहा है कि ये मुद्रास्फीति के ऊपर विदेश भर, देश भर, चारों तरफ एक काबू पाने की स्थिति बने हुए और खास करके इंडिया में, तो मैं मानता हूं बेशक ये पैसा कुछ जो भी मार्केट से गया हुआ है, क्योंकि मार्केट में बहुत ज्यादा जल्दी अगर गिरावट होते हैं तो मार्केट में बाइंग अपॉर्चुनिटीज भी बहुत जल्दी वापस आते हैं, और खास करके FIIs जिनका बहुत ही तेजी रूप से निर्णय होता है कि इन टर्म्स ऑफ इन्वेस्टमेंट, आउटफ्लो, इनफ्लोज एंड ऑल, तो उस वक्त शायद पैसा दोबारा वापस आ सकता है।
आपने मुद्रास्फीति की बात की, तो अभी जो WPI के जो आंकड़े आए हैं थोक मुद्रास्फीति के, इन आंकड़ों का असर क्या आने वाले वक्त में CPI पर भी देखने को मिलेगा?
हाँ बिल्कुल, इसमें कोई दो राय नहीं है, क्योंकि मेन तो फोकस ये है कि जब WPI एज ए इंडेक्स हम आंकड़े के तौर से विस्तृत रूप से आलोचना के तौर से लेते हैं, लेकिन मेन हर्ट होता है हम CPI में, और वहां पे मैं मानता हूं बेशक एक अलग से इसमें नुकसान तो हमें पहुंचना सामना भी करना है।
Let's time to slip into a quick commercial break, but do stay tuned because we have lots coming up on the other side.
उपभोक्ताओं तक पहुंचने का सुलभ और सस्ता माध्यम है आकाशवाणी।
आकाशवाणी के विभिन्न केंद्रों से कीजिए अपने उत्पादों और सेवाओं का प्रचार विज्ञापनों के माध्यम से।
लोकल और राष्ट्रीय स्तर पर कीजिए अपने बिजनेस का विस्तार, क्योंकि आकाशवाणी में विज्ञापन बुकिंग हुई बहुत ही आसान।
अब घर, दफ्तर या दुकान पर बैठे बैठे आप कर सकते हैं विज्ञापनों की बुकिंग।
डायल कीजिए 870-001-4242।
नंबर एक बार फिर नोट करें, 870-001-4242।
Welcome back to Market Mantra. Before slipping in the break, we were talking about inflation. Well, Jayanta, primarily we see that the food and fuel prices, they are kind of running away with something, and this is the thing which is primarily hurting the consumers and the general populace as well. And with the RBI kind of in that tightening mode, it has to come more and more in the coming months, in the next few quarters as well. So do you really think that this could be the only mode through which this could be controlled, and is it really going in the right direction?
Well, obviously, any inflation needs to be curtailed through a monetary policy measure, and you would like to have fiscal intervention somewhere in terms of taxes and all maybe to be reduced, as we saw when our domestic oil prices, there was tinkering in the excise duty, which led to a reduction of 8 to 9 rupees for petrol and diesel prices per liter. So those can also happen in consequent terms, in terms of how fast, as you said, runaway inflation, food prices as well as. Now when it comes to food prices, as I said, monsoon would be a very important factor.
Indeed, yeah.
And if it is not sustained and well distributed, and if it's skewed, and the distribution is not proper manner, some states would have floods and some states would face drought, then obviously there is no way the government can even go and control the food prices, specifically but let's also not forget, for example, oil.
Yes.
Which is one of the major import basket, cooking oil.
Yes,
what I'm talking
exactly.
About. Now, all sunflower oil which has been majorly being imported from Ukraine has stopped.
Yes.
On the lower level, palm oil which was imported, that has stopped.
Indonesia, Malaysia, yes.
Yeah, so that has stopped.
Yeah.
So now India is not self-dependent on oil, right? So either has been replaced by a higher price of oil, somewhere the substitute is coming in, since we are not having all our sunflower oil requirements, so it must be substituted with more expensive oil. And we have seen that oil prices at the retail level has actually shot up by almost 50 to 60% over the last 3 to 4 months, if you take account.
Right.
So if those things keep on persisting, as I said, and that's why when Vishal asked me the question of do we see a scenario happening in a sustained manner in the next 3 to 4 months of FPIs coming back, I believe inflation would be an important factor. And not only all monetary policy bodies, all government bodies, they believe at this point of time it's an accepted fact. We have to manage inflation, otherwise we are going to see a stagflation sort of a scenario. So we don't want to enter into that scenario. So answering your question directly, obviously, this is one of the best ways in terms of tackling inflation. There is no sure shot way, otherwise then everyone would have done that exactly. But not only monetary policy interventions, we also need God's intervention in terms of good rains.
Yes.
So that's also a very important factor for price of, controlling prices of food products.
Indeed. And moving on to the next story, in the forex market, the rupee today weakened 7 paise against the US dollar. The domestic currency closed at 78 rupees and 7 paise against the American unit. The dollar index, which indicates the US dollar's strength against a basket of 6 other leading currencies, fell 0.63% to trade at 104.85 in the intraday trade.
और बात देश के निर्यात की, इस वर्ष मई महीने में भारत का कुल निर्यात 62 अरब डॉलर से ज्यादा रहा है। ये पिछले वर्ष की इसी अवधि की तुलना में 24% से अधिक है। वाणिज्य और उद्योग मंत्रालय ने बताया है कि इस वर्ष मई महीने में वस्तुओं के निर्यात में 20% और सेवाओं के निर्यात में 30% से अधिक की वृद्धि दर्ज हुई है। मंत्रालय ने बताया कि इस निर्यात की बढ़ोतरी में पेट्रोलियम, इलेक्ट्रॉनिक और चमड़े के उत्पाद, कॉफी और खाद्य पदार्थों का प्रमुख योगदान रहा है। जयंता, निर्यात के मोर्चे पर तो एक अच्छी खबर है, लेकिन क्या ये जिस तरीके से हमारा आयात भी बढ़ रहा है उसमें हम बहुत ही एक कंफर्ट पोजीशन में हैं।
ट्रेड बैलेंस हम लोग का काफी मतलब स्क्यूड तो है, कंसर्न नहीं बोलूंगा इस वक्त, बट ये जरूर है कि स्क्यूड है। और मौजूदा हालात में हालांकि वी आर ट्राइंग टू comfort the import prices by importing oil from Russia to some extent. मेजर वे आई थिंक हम लोग कुछ आंकड़े में बता रहा था कि पिछले 20-25 साल में इतना तेल शायद ना आया जितना अभी आया हुआ है रशिया से, इस वक्त आ रहा है ज्यादा। तो ऐसा स्थिति में ये जरूर है कि एक्सपोर्ट कितना राहत दे पाएगा, मैं नहीं मानता हूँ राहत दे पाएगा, लेकिन अच्छी खबर ये है कि डिस्पाइट such over-inflationary market globally, despite such overheated markets globally, एक्सपोर्ट में जो ट्रेंड काफी दिन लगा एस्टेब्लिश होने में इन टर्म्स ऑफ ग्रोथ, अगर आप पिछले 3-4 साल का आंकड़े देखेंगे एक्सपोर्ट में ग्रोथ नहीं था, तो वो जो ट्रेंड एस्टेब्लिश हुआ है एक्सपोर्ट ग्रोथ का, वो ट्रेंड थोड़ा बहुत बरकरार है इस मार्केट में भी। तो ये जरूर मैं समझता हूँ कि एक अच्छे मतलब अ गुड सिल्वर लाइनिंग अमॉन्ग्स अदरवाइज डार्क ग्रे क्लाउड्स व्हिच वी सी एट दिस पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम। बिल्कुल वी श्योरली वेलकम दिस न्यूज विद अ वेरी पॉजिटिव नोट। जी,
रुक करते हैं वैश्विक शेयर बाजारों का। सबसे पहले एशियाई शेयर बाजार। एशियाई शेयर बाजारों में आज कारोबार मिला जुला रहा। हांगकांग के हैंगसेंग में 1.1% और चीन का शंघाई कंपोजिट इंडेक्स 0.5% की बढ़त में रहे। दूसरी तरफ दक्षिण कोरिया का कोस्पी 1.8% और जापान का निकेई सूचकांक 1.1% लुढ़क गए। सिंगापुर का स्ट्रेट्स टाइम्स सूचकांक 0.1% के मामूली नुकसान के साथ बंद हुआ। यूरोपीय बाजारों की बात करें तो अंतर्देशीय कारोबार में यूरोपीय शेयर बाजारों में बढ़त का रुख था। ताजा समाचार मिलने तक लंदन का FTSE 100 1.3%, जबकि फ्रांस का कैक 1% और जर्मनी का डेक्स 1.2% की बढ़त के साथ कारोबार कर रहे थे।
And moving on to the US markets, the Dow and the S&P 500 ended lower yesterday as the index was unable to bounce from a sharp sell-off in the prior session, with a key policy statement from the Federal Reserve on deck that will reveal how aggressive the central bank's policy path will be. The Dow Jones Industrial Average Index fell 0.5%, the S&P 500 slipped 0.4%, while the Nasdaq Composite Index added 0.2%. Well, Jayanta, as we were talking to Avinash earlier in the program, and when he said that we have to wait for tonight for some more time to see the federal rates, how they are going to pan out. So do you really think that it's going to be very aggressive this time?
Well, they have spoken of,
especially given that the inflation is kind of galloping away.
But the initial discussion, if you see the last 2 or 3 months of reports, they have spoken of 25 to 30 basis points over 6 intervals. Now that's what their broad trend line has been. He speaks of 75 basis points jump, which I believe will be a bit painful at this point of time to see. But then these are very abnormal times in terms of where the inflation is headed. And as I told you, in US, the markets are so overheated. I was there last month, just to give you a very small example in terms of India. A 3-hour flight, which is typically between Delhi to Bangalore. So a 3-hour flight in US, if you are going to buy tickets, in Indian terms, rupee terms, if you convert the dollar terms, it costs around 45 to 50,000 rupees one way. So that's the type of inflation levels and price levels which we are seeing. So this I think in one line gives away how overheated the US markets are at this point of time. So obviously there has to be some tinkering in terms of,
Moving on to oil now. Oil prices today fell on concerns about fuel demand and global economic growth before an expected big hike in the interest rate by the U.S. Federal Reserve. The crude oil prices fell around 0.5% in the intraday trade. Brent crude was trading at around $120.70 per barrel, while the WTI crude prices were at $118.40 per barrel. Well, Jayanta, we have been going through reports that in the current fiscal and as well as in the next year, the supply thing, oil supply would not be kind of what the demand would be, and this would continue for some more time, and probably this would disrupt the supply chain more, and obviously inflation and other things going up as well consequently. So how do you see this, and where do you see oil going in the near future?
Well, it's a crazy balance, because if inflation continues, obviously growth will be hampered. If growth gets hampered, oil prices obviously will fall down, because there will not be much demand of oil. So unless we get to see exactly how the scenario pans up, I think at this point of time the oil prices will be more led by what's happening in the European region between Ukraine and Russia and the supply side bottlenecks. But in terms of demand being consistently growing or not, I think that's a severe issue to be discussed, because I don't see demand increasing in that sort of a runaway level, and that's where maybe the superheated oil prices can also fall thereon.
और अब चलते चलते सोने की कीमतों पर नजर डाल लेते हैं। मल्टी कमोडिटी एक्सचेंज पर अगस्त अनुबंध वाला सोना 570 रुपए महंगा होकर 50,770 रुपए प्रति 10 ग्राम पर चल रहा था। जुलाई अनुबंध वाली चांदी भी 1,245 रुपए की मजबूती से 60,745 रुपए प्रति किलो के स्तर पर कारोबार कर रही थी। न्यूयॉर्क मर्केंटाइल एक्सचेंज में सोना बढ़त के साथ $1,835 20 सेंट प्रति औंस, जबकि चांदी $21.50 प्रति औंस पर कारोबार कर रहे थे। जयंता दास, कार्यक्रम में शामिल होने और हमारे श्रोताओं को बहुमूल्य जानकारी देने के लिए आपका धन्यवाद।
शुक्रिया।
Thank you, Jayanta. And before we close, a look at the headlines once again. Domestic stock indices witness modest losses amid mixed global cues. Sensex closes below 52,500. Nifty settles below 15,700 level. Rupee weakens to 78 rupees and 7 paise against the US dollar. And Brent crude prices hover around $120 per barrel. Well, that's it in this edition of Market Mantra. I am Nishit Kumar, along with me, co-anchor Vishal Sharma, saying goodbye.
Market Mantra. Market Mantra.